The reinforced deck was built to withstand the footfalls of creatures weighing half a ton. It had never cracked. Not once. "Observe," Instructor Verlek said smugly. "Even our heaviest species cannot damage this alloy." Alien cadets strutted across it with pride. Then the humans stepped forward. One foot landed. Crack. The classroom froze. Verlek stared at the spreading fissure and whispered, "That shouldn't be possible." 3 hours earlier, the advanced physics lab pulsed with light and gentle vibrations as the cadets filed in, the room automatically adjusting environmental settings to accommodate various species. The trinic shells preferred colder mist. The Corthons emitted body heat like small furnaces, and the lone human Corporal Daniel Reeve stood out simply by being able to breathe unaided in all of it. Daniel entered without ceremony, his regulation boots echoing with soft authority across the polished floor. His dark fatigues bore no insignia of rank beyond a discreet Earth insignia over the right shoulder, a stylized blue sphere wrapped in orbit lines. He chose a seat near the back, out of direct sight lines, and sat with an expression that said he'd been here before. Instructor Verlek was already hovering at the center of the domed room, drifting slowly above the demonstration pit on a grav disc. He was tall, lizardiform, with pale, armored skin that shimmered faintly under the lab's light-filtered skylights. His long fingers twitched in anticipation as he watched the students settle. "Cadets," he began, with the calm confidence of someone who had long ago stopped expecting to be questioned. "Today, we analyze biomechanics in gravitational environments across the known habitable spectrum. Our goal is to understand not just strength, but how gravity forges or fails to forge resilience." With a smooth gesture, he activated the lab's central projector. Dozens of holographic spheres bloomed into view, each representing a known, intelligent species' homeworld. Their surface gravity, mass, atmospheric density, and environmental hazards floated alongside. "Here," he said, indicating a pale lavender world. "Trinax, surface gravity, 3.8 Earth standard, high-pressure liquid environment, species evolved with semi-rigid exoskeletons and fluid chambers. Every step is like pushing through syrup." The Trinic students clicked their translucent outer shells in approval, bubbles venting gently from the filtration gills along their sides. Verlek continued. "Next Gravitas 4. Surface gravity, 4.3 standard. Its denizens learn resistance from birth. Their bone structure is denser than lead alloys, their tendons reinforced with hyperprotein strands." A pair of graviton cadets flexed their clawed hands, making a show of their mass as they grinned at one another. "Impressive, yes?" Verlek asked, although the answer was rhetorical. Then, the projection shifted again. A small blue sphere appeared. "Earth," the instructor said, almost dismissively. 1.0 gravity, nearly no environmental hazards beyond meteorological events and minor tectonics, lacks the evolutionary pressure necessary to produce truly robust species. Laughter rippled across the room. One of the Lithari leaned toward his classmate. "Isn't that the one where their infants can't even walk until several moon cycles?" Another replied, "They rely on machines to do basic lifting, gravity-assist chairs, even in childhood." The Corthan Tusk Mauler let out a low rumble of amusement. "I've seen their exercise routines, hopping in place, repetitive limb movements. They call it cardio." Daniel sat still. He didn't react, didn't defend, just tapped his thumb against his boot once, then again. Verlek turned to face him, his thin lips stretching into something close to a smile. "We welcome exchange students from all recognized worlds, of course, even those evolved under less demanding conditions. Education should be inclusive." That brought a fresh wave of smirks. Daniel met his eyes for a moment, then looked back toward the floating Earth hologram. "And now," Verlek announced, "we move to practical observation. You will each cross the observation platform while we record locomotion data. The deck, as many of you know, is alloy reinforced to absorb even high-impact movement." The floor in front of the cadets lit up an open circular space with faint blue grid lines and recessed pressure sensors. Atop it sat the infamous alloy deck, 20 layers of interlaced nanosteel, impact-rated for drop-pod shock absorption. It has withstood the kinetic loads of a Corthan assault unit landing at speed, Virlek said proudly. This is not decorative flooring, it is structural technology designed for war. He gestured to the Korthan student. Demonstrate, please. The tusked behemoth lumbered to the platform and stomped across with deliberate weight. The floor hummed slightly, stabilizers adjusting, but the gridline readings remained within safe margins. One by one, the cadets followed. The Gravitan twins moved in precise, balanced steps that barely registered on the sensors. The Trinic glided with smooth efficiency. Even the multi-limbed Grolt, whose heavy torso normally cracked standard seating, left the deck unchanged. Virlek was glowing with satisfaction. You see, strong bones, distributed pressure, mass supported by evolved structure, all properly adapted for their planetary conditions. He turned, almost theatrically. And now, he said, let us observe Earth's offering. He didn't even call Daniel by name. Daniel stood. No dramatic pause, no glare or slow-motion stare-down, just a soldier rising because he was asked to. He stepped toward the platform, pausing only to tap his boots twice against the floor, as if setting them into place. Then he lifted his right foot and planted it firmly on the deck. Crack. Not a creak, not a hum, a sharp, decisive noise that silenced the room like a gunshot. A thin fracture line spidered out beneath his boot. Virlek flinched. No, that cannot. The scanner display began to blink. Daniel looked down, shifted his weight slightly. Crack. The fissure widened. The reinforced alloy meant to absorb battlefield impact had failed, under the weight of a single human step. Virlek snapped toward the console. The scanner was redlining. Stress indicators exceeded combat thresholds. One quadrant of the deck dropped by a single millimeter. He's not heavy enough, the Gravitan cadet whispered. He's maybe 90 kilograms. That's half the Grolt. He's not that dense either, someone muttered. Daniel finally spoke. It's not density, it's physics. He took a second step. The crack deepened audibly. Earthborn musculature is built for sudden bursts, sprinting, jumping, escaping predators that didn't care how heavy you were, just how fast. The scanner flared again. Virlek looked stricken. We trained for explosive force, Daniel continued, because survival wasn't about surviving gravity, it was about surviving chaos. Our muscles don't spread impact, they concentrate it. He pivoted slightly, digging his heel in just enough to cause a hairline fracture to veer across the outer ring of the deck. A monitor hissed and shut off. The Lithari cadet whispered, That's impact energy like a compressed leg piston, but from biological tissue? Daniel glanced over. That's what happens when your body evolves for 10-meter jumps and rock climbing without claws. He stepped off the deck. Behind him, the crack ran from end to end. Silence. Virlek swallowed. That platform is alloy layered, war rated. Daniel turned to him, calmly. Next time, warn me if the floor is fragile. Later, once the cadets had left in a dazed silence, Virlek submitted a required incident report. It began with a single line. Observation deck, compromised by unexpected ground force output from Earthborn subject. The biomechanics team ran diagnostics 3 times. They confirmed no power fluctuations. No calibration error. No trick. Just one human. Walking. The database was updated that same day. Species, Earthborn human. Classification, high-impact locomotion. Note, despite moderate mass, subjects can generate extreme localized pressure, incompatible with standard composite flooring. Deck plating must be reinforced. Do not base structural tolerance assessments on gravitational background alone. The next morning, no one laughed when the Earth hologram reappeared. Not even Virlek. The observation deck remained sealed for 2 full days. Technicians in exosuits floated above the damaged alloy surface, muttering in quiet disbelief as they reviewed stress fracture simulations. No one had expected a human footfall on a walk, no less to do what a Gravitan stampede couldn't. By day 3, security had cordoned off the entire platform, tagging it with hazard stripes and an incident code usually reserved for failed equipment tests. Daniel Reeve wasn't particularly interested in the fuss. He'd already moved on. In his quarters, he was doing controlled pull-ups from the frame of the ceiling hatch, boots off, bare arms tight with tension, sweat beaded on his brow. A music track played in his ear, a slow, rhythmic drum pattern from Earth's Pacific Islands, something calming and old. The door chimed. He dropped lightly, toweled off, and palmed it open. Instructor Virlek stood there, not floating, walking. A first. "May I come in?" the Vairathi asked stiffly. Daniel blinked. "Sure." Virlek stepped inside awkwardly, hands behind his back. The room was small, by Helion Academy standards, Spartan. Just a bed, a terminal, and a single framed photo on the wall. Daniel and two other humans in snow gear, all squinting into a white blur. Virlek tilted his head toward it. "Is this your homeworld?" Daniel nodded. "Alaska, northern region, winter training." "They sent you into ice for training?" "We volunteered." Virlek's jaw moved subtly, not a smile, not confusion, somewhere in between. There was a pause. "I reviewed the footage," the instructor finally said. "I figured." Virlek looked around again, still standing like he wasn't sure whether to sit or leave. "We underestimated certain biomechanical variables. Earth's evolutionary path appears inefficient at first glance, but I've begun to suspect we're defining efficiency too narrowly." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You came to say that?" "No," Virlek hesitated. "I came to ask if you'd allow us to run more tests, controlled ones, without alloy platforms underfoot." Daniel smirked. "You want me to break more things?" "We want to understand how you break them," Virlek corrected. "That incident cost the Academy nearly 200,000 Galcred in damages. The administration would prefer not to repeat it by accident." Daniel gestured to the makeshift pull-up bar. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I didn't do anything special. I walked." "Precisely," Virlek said, voice brightening. "That's what's so alarming." The biomechanics testing chamber was buried 5 levels beneath the main campus, where even graviton atmospheric pressure wouldn't cause stress on the walls. Daniel sat on a cushioned bench while scanners calibrated around him. 3 instructors, 4 researchers, and an unusually alert AI assistant hovered nearby. Virlek led the session. "Corporal, could you describe your physical training regimen since your arrival?" Daniel shrugged. "Light resistance in the mornings, simulated gravity combat drills 3 times a week, daily flexibility cycle." The AI chimed in. "His caloric intake is 22% below Helion Academy's average cadet, yet he maintains 94% lean muscle mass." One of the graviton researchers whispered, "That's not possible without chemical enhancement." "No enhancers," Daniel said. "Earthborn military bans those. We condition the old-fashioned way." A silence settled. Virlek coughed politely. "Let's begin." The first test involved a standard force plate. Daniel stood barefoot on the sensor, then performed a simple vertical jump. The screen lit up. Peak output, 4,960 newtons. The AI read. A Lethari scientist blinked. "That's more than double a graviton burst jump, and he's not even at full exertion." Daniel shrugged again. "Didn't stretch first." The tests continued. Single leg squats, explosive push-offs, static load-bearing. In each case, Daniel's movements produced force readings that left the aliens either amazed or mildly horrified. "This next one," Virlek said, "is a controlled stride simulation. We've replicated the material from the previous observation deck at 110 scale. Just step on it with normal walking pressure." Daniel nodded. He stepped. The model cracked. The room groaned audibly. "Why?" one of the researchers muttered. "How can he create so much force in such a narrow contact point?" Daniel offered the answer before they could ask again. "You're used to species that evolved with consistent load-bearing distribution. Big feet, flat pads, weight spread over larger surfaces. Earth's terrain is different. Mud, rocks, branches, snow. We evolved to strike fast and push off fast. Heel to toe. That's leverage, not mass." Virlek's fingers tapped the edge of his tablet. "It's true," Daniel went on. "Our Achilles tendon stores and releases energy like a spring. Our calves act as shock absorbers. But when you reverse it, when we push against a solid object, we're applying that force in a tiny surface area." One of the Trinic scientists, ensconced in her sealed fluid chamber, murmured, "Localized impact evolution, not spread efficiency." Daniel nodded. Exactly. Virelek looked at him, an odd new respect glinting in his reptilian eyes. Earthborn creatures evolved to survive terrain more than gravity. And terrain changes fast, Daniel said. Gravity doesn't. Later that evening, word had already spread. In the campus courtyard, a group of Lithari cadets ran simulated drills, light-footed and graceful, as always, but they paused when Daniel walked past. A few looked down at the concrete tiles as if half expecting them to rupture. Daniel kept walking. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, that wasn't his style, but he understood posture, movement, the way body language spoke when words didn't. After the fifth stare, he sighed. You can ask, he said to the nearest Lithari. She hesitated. Does it hurt to walk like that? Daniel paused. Only if I'm trying not to. What do you mean? He looked down at his boots. When I hold back, I walk wrong. Too soft. Bad for the knees. Humans aren't built for gentle restraint. We're built for efficiency under chaos. That means bursts, leverage, and correction, not gliding. She blinked. So, your body is always ready to break something? He shrugged. Pretty much. The next day, the Academy issued a new internal directive. Memo. Interspecies Structural Design Protocol Update. Effective immediately, all training platforms, deck materials, and physical sensors must account for Earthborn impact profiles, regardless of total body mass. Failure to meet this specification will be treated as negligence in shared species environments. The addendum at the bottom was signed personally by Virelek. Daniel read it over lunch. He smiled into his coffee. Across the courtyard, a group of Corthan students eyed him, not with mockery, but with curiosity. One even nodded. Progress. Still, Daniel knew better than to think it was over. Humans had a way of surprising people, even when you warned them first. And not all surprises were met with understanding. Helion Academy had over 70 labs. Only 3 were classified for Tier 4 biomechanical hazard simulations, and only one of those had ever needed real-time environmental reinforcement protocols triggered by a walking test subject. That lab now bore a new sign on its door. Caution. Earthborn testing in progress, structural limits monitored. Inside, a new round of experiments was underway, but this time, the tone had changed. Gone were the skeptical jokes, the whispered mockery about low-gravity creatures. What remained was a deep, slightly nervous respect. Every researcher in the room now treated Corporal Daniel Reeve as both a specimen and a warning. Even Daniel felt the shift. There was a stiffness in the air as he flexed his shoulders and stepped up to the redesigned force chamber. The test floor beneath him wasn't alloy this time. It was smart gel foam mounted atop a grav-adjusted pressure plate, built to simulate the resistance of various materials without the risk of actual damage. The technician, a sharp-eyed Jelthy with 10 wrist stalks for manipulating controls, called out the first simulation from behind a layered polymer shield. Test 1. Artificial granite plate, 1.8 density factor. Walk across at standard pace. Daniel nodded. He moved. Smooth, controlled steps, heel to toe, no sprinting, no sudden shifts. The floor didn't crack. But the scanners screamed. Localized force spike at 1.1 tons per square inch, the AI read. Center of heel. Duration, 0.17 seconds. Virelek, observing from the side, winced. You weren't exaggerating. That's nearly the impact profile of a powered exosuit landing from half a story. Daniel adjusted his shoulders. I'm not even landing. I'm just walking. Exactly, the Jelthy muttered, rapidly tweaking sensor thresholds. Your default movement settings are exceeding standard military tolerance by a factor of 3, and you're not even trying. Daniel looked up. You want me to try? Virelek raised a hand quickly. Not on this floor. Behind the shield, nervous laughter flickered among the tech staff. The test resumed with controlled squats, sudden direction shifts, combat stances all recorded in excruciating detail. Every time Daniel transitioned from motionless to moving, the spike in readings caused someone to flinch. Finally, after the last movement trial, the AI chimed in with a soft beep. Biomechanical profile complete. Virelek approached, holding a datapad. I believe we understand now what our engineers didn't. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow with a towel. That's comforting. No, I mean it, Virlek said, more serious now. Your muscles aren't just dense, they're primed, constantly under tension, like coiled fibers waiting to fire. Daniel nodded slowly. Muscle memory. It's not just training, it's evolution. Our bodies assume chaos is coming. One of the assistants looked puzzled. Then, why didn't Earth evolve creatures with thicker bones? Or greater body mass? Like the gravitan? Daniel glanced at her. Because we had to move fast. And stay fast. If your leg breaks on Earth, you die. If you can't leap out of a predator's reach in one motion, you don't pass your genes on. The silence that followed was not the awkward kind. It was contemplative. Your world is more violent than we assumed, Virlek said. It's more unpredictable, Daniel corrected. Violence just teaches the lesson faster. By the end of the week, Daniel had a nickname. No one said it to his face. Not directly. But he heard it. Deck Cracker. It wasn't mocking. Not anymore. In fact, among the cadets, it had become almost reverent. The story had spread beyond the physics lab. The deck, the scanner, red line, the calm walk, followed by the casual remark about warning him next time. It all became part of an unofficial academy myth. One evening in the mess hall, a pair of bulky Korthans gave up their table when Daniel entered. He told them it wasn't necessary. They insisted anyway. Later, during cross-species sparring rotations, two Lithari asked to partner with him. For the biomechanics challenge, they claimed. But their eyes said something else. Curiosity. Fascination. Wariness. Daniel kept his demeanor calm. Professional. But inside, he understood something critical had shifted. Humans weren't invisible anymore. They were seen. And more than that, they were not underestimated. 2 days later, he was called to a review board. He entered a stark gray chamber lined with 3 faculty members, including Virlek, the Academy's chief safety officer, and a representative from the Interworld Military Liaison Office, a gray-skinned Kaloon with digitized eyes and the stiff posture of someone who hadn't smiled since birth. The Kaloon spoke first. Corporal Reeve, your presence at the Academy has raised several interspecies safety concerns. Daniel met his gaze evenly. Understood. You've destroyed 1 deck, destabilized 2 training platforms, and caused 6 simulation recalibrations. 1 Gravitan student reported a stress reaction after sparring with you. He described the experience as being hunted. Daniel raised an eyebrow. I wasn't hunting anyone. I was trying not to break his arm. Virlek interjected before the Kaloon could respond. All due respect, Administrator, but I believe we're framing this wrong. Reeve hasn't posed a threat. He's revealed a gap in our understanding. The safety officer frowned. A gap in engineering protocol. We can't have platforms cracking under cadet footfalls. Then change the platforms, Virlek said sharply. Or change the assumptions behind them. The room fell silent. Daniel looked between them. With respect, I'm happy to withdraw, if I become a liability. No, Virlek said immediately. Even the Kaloon paused, then slowly shook his head. We don't want you to leave. We want to know how many more like you exist. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. About 8 billion. That gave them pause. Virlek cleared his throat. Proposal. We allow continued enrollment under modified conditions, adjusted training materials, a dedicated research directive on Earthborne force application. The Kaloon finally nodded. Approved. But we want data, and we want it soon. Daniel stood and offered a crisp nod. Understood. As he left the room, the Kaloon leaned to the safety officer and muttered, 8 billion. The safety officer shivered slightly. That night, Daniel returned to his quarters and opened a private message from an Earthside contact. It was from Lieutenant Brooks, his CO back on the orbital training station near Mars. The message was short. Heard you broke a floor. Good work. Keep breaking their assumptions. Attached was a single image, a cracked ceramic plate from Earth's lunar outpost training dome. Daniel recognized it instantly. His first sparring match off-world. The moment he'd realized that humans didn't just adapt to space, they weaponized adaptation. He leaned back, remembering. That moment on the observation deck hadn't been a fluke. It was just physics, finally catching up to Earth's legacy. In worlds built to handle mass but not momentum, humans were something else entirely. Not heavier, just different. And difference, as he'd learned over and over, was the most disruptive force in the universe. The upgraded platform glowed faintly in the morning light, its surface a mix of synthetic flex metal and variable density cores, engineered specifically to withstand directional impulse surges, a phrase that now appeared in every Helion Academy infrastructure guideline, with a silent nod to one. Human. Corporal Daniel Reeves stepped up onto the new training floor with mild curiosity. It didn't groan, it didn't crack, it simply absorbed him, the way a world should. A dozen species stood watching along the perimeter of the training dome, each in combat gear, each tense. This wasn't a normal class. It was a demonstration. Not of strength, but of compatibility. 2 months had passed since the deck cracking incident. 2 months of recalibration, recalculations, and rethinking every assumption the Academy held about how force behaved in multi-species environments. For years, the prevailing wisdom had been simple. High gravity equaled high stress tolerance. Big equals dangerous. Earth, by all official records, was mild, even soft. Not anymore. Begin Scenario 1. Virlek called out from the control booth. The lighting shifted. Obstacle walls rose from the floor, forming a crude maze. Not for navigation, but for movement-type testing. Side pressure, directional bursts, drop landings, real tactical maneuvers. The kind Daniel trained for back home, but rarely saw simulated out here. He took a deep breath and moved. The walls were tight. Every turn forced him to pivot hard, pushing off the ball of his foot with trained precision. He lunged low under a closing gate, rolled, and came up with a spring-loaded recovery that sent a visible shock wave through the flex metal floor. Sensors chirped. Virlek's data stream spiked again. But the platform held. Outside the test zone, a pair of Graviton cadets watched in fascination. "He doesn't slow," one murmured. "He doesn't have to," the other replied. "His motion is coiled, efficient, like a grass-tail snake." Further down the line, a Trinic biomech engineer floated in her fluid tank, recording every movement with her internal optic lens. His load transfer is almost predictive, like his body calculates stress in advance. Daniel finished the run with a controlled stop, one foot planted and the other braced behind. He looked up, calm, barely winded. Virlek's voice came through the intercom. "Excellent. Scenario 2. Reactive terrain." The floor reconfigured under his boots. Sections now simulated unstable, ground, gravel, mud, ice. Alien equivalents were layered in, including Zarn dust and the slippery moss plains of Viru Kesh. Daniel moved again. His boot strikes changed. More lateral pressure, sharper pivots. His knees adjusted mid-step, and his center of gravity dropped slightly. Watching him was like watching muscle memory adapt in real time. A Lithari observer whispered, "He's not fighting terrain, he's partnering with it." Another cadet near her nodded. "Earth's chaos training. They don't avoid difficult ground, they expect it." Daniel's foot slipped on the Viru Kesh simulation, but he caught himself with a pivot and a hard plant of his rear foot. A crackling sound echoed from beneath, but it wasn't structural. It was the gel pack mimicking rupture response. He didn't break stride. When the trial ended, Daniel walked back to the center of the dome. The silence in the room was absolute. Then came applause, not thunderous, but respectful, a ripple of appreciation from every edge of the room. Virlek stepped onto the platform and handed him a towel. "I didn't think you'd finish that sequence without destabilizing at least one module." Daniel wiped his forehead. "You built it better." "You forced us to," Virlek replied, not without humor. Daniel sat on the edge of the platform, taking a moment to breathe. His muscles were tight, but not strained. His heart rate had barely spiked. It was all normal for him. But he understood now that normal for humans wasn't normal everywhere. Virlek joined him on the platform, looking out over the cadets. "Do you know what happened 2 days ago?" the instructor asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. "We received a request from the Inner World Engineering Council. They want a full review of all gravity-based assumptions in structural design. From orbital stations to assault gear, you set off a chain reaction. Daniel raised an eyebrow. By walking? Virlek smiled, just barely. Yes. And by not pretending it meant nothing. Later that day, Daniel was invited to a closed seminar. It was attended by senior engineers, interspecies tacticians, and even 2 fleet logistics officers. Not the kind of crowd you usually get for a corporal. He stood before them, not with charts or equations, but with something better: presence. The holographic display behind him showed side-by-side comparisons of movement: Gravitan, Lithari, Korthan, and finally, Earthborn. Each one generated different patterns of ground reaction, forces, torque, rebound curves. The human graph was sharp, peaked, spiked. Most of your equipment, Daniel began, assumes danger is about weight, size, gravity conditioning. But you're missing how humans evolved, not to push against the ground, but to explode off it. He pointed at the force spike. Leverage, stored tension, adaptive muscular control. We don't just move, we redirect. One of the fleet officers raised a hand. Why didn't any of this show up in your recruitment data? Human stats were well within safe ranges. Daniel shrugged. Because you measured for weight, height, stride length. You didn't measure for potential energy release. Nobody ever asks how much force a human could generate if they stopped holding back. That landed hard. Another question came, this time from a Lithari motion analyst. But what if humans lose control? In confined environments, this could be catastrophic. Daniel looked her in the eye. Then teach humans control. But don't mistake caution for weakness. The room stayed quiet. Then the admiral in the back nodded. 2 weeks later, Helion Academy held a multi-species training symposium. It was the first to include a full module on directional impulse threat awareness, and Daniel Reeve was listed as the example case. Instructors cited his movement footage. Engineers redesigned the Academy's hand-to-hand combat zones to include flex walls and new floor tension limits. One memo read, "Effective immediately. Do not assess kinetic risk solely by planetary origin. Evaluate based on structure, leverage potential, and muscle control under chaos stress. See Earthborn Case File 001. Case File 001. Daniel didn't love the title, but it worked. At the symposium, he gave one last talk. No tech, no visuals, just standing on a panel stage beside a Gravitan war tactician and a Trinic defense engineer. Humans didn't evolve under crushing gravity, he said. We evolved under unpredictable threats. We learned to store tension, move fast, and adapt. That doesn't make us stronger. Just surprisingly effective, where systems aren't built to handle that kind of input. A Lithari student raised a hand. So what should we do when working with humans? Daniel smiled slightly. Trust them to know their own limits, but don't assume they have the same ones you do. That earned quiet nods across the room. The final time, Daniel walked across the training deck. No one flinched. Because this time, the platform didn't crack. It flexed, absorbed, adapted, just like he had. Virlek stood nearby, arms crossed. You've changed the way we teach, he said. Daniel looked around at the updated training grounds, the reinforced support beams, the variable flooring that could shift density in real time. I didn't plan on that. You didn't have to, Virlek replied. You just walked, and everything else followed. Daniel paused, then stepped off the deck and turned to him. Next time, he said with a wry grin, don't build your floors so fragile. Virlek gave a quiet laugh. This time, the joke was shared. And no one ever laughed at Earth again.